So earlier in how people interact, we have seen that two important things. Number one is that there is something called a trade-off, which is the uh, pioneer in an exchange. And through that trade-off, the system runs. And then we went on to how systems can ensure that this trade-off remain what it should be. And there we saw that markets are often a good way to work things efficiently. We learned about something called market mechanism or price mechanism. Also, in that, we observed the idea of the invisible hand as put forward by Adam Smith. But as it happens, that market, since it is impersonal, okay, it's not always the fact that whatever result the market yield, which will be obviously efficient, of that there is no doubt that it will be efficient, but on not all the time. Okay, so in the sense that this efficient result, we may not really love it. Okay, we may not think that that efficient result is socially desirable. Okay, for example, if the market mechanism yields a high price of something, for example, currently high price of onions is a huge issue in many states. So in that case, the government must come to uh, play its role. So the seventh principle that we'll study now actually explores the role of the government, role of the government. So let's look at that principle itself. So principle 7, government can sometimes improve market outcomes. Okay, now here two of the important words that we must look for. First of all is improve. That means what? That means whatever outcome that we are having without the government is not desirable. So the question improvement, what improvement first implies that we have something which is not desirable. And if we say that it is not desirable, then we must talk about some yardstick based on which we are measuring or we are saying whether the result that we have is desirable or not. So that is huge. The second important word is sometimes. So we are also saying here that you know, that much like the point of discussion regarding the role of government is that market mechanism at times fails. In government's role also, we have the word sometimes. Now, this sometimes can be interpreted in two ways. Number one is something called government failure. Okay, it's not that there is only uh, a market can fail, there can be government failure as well. And one of the popular segment where government failure can be easily seen is education. Okay, although education is for all and it must be served and all, but as time passes we see that people are more moving into private education where government education is being offered at a lower price and and in most of the cases free. So in our country, when it comes to education, we observe a government failure. So government, although taken up the role of providing education in a very large way, we must say that it is not as successful as it should be. So we have private players now for a long time. But this is not always the case. For example, in Europe, you will see a very different picture when it comes to education provided by the government. There also it is free, but there it works quite beautifully. That is first. The second thing, second interpretation that we can look into is that there may not be government failure, but just it's not possible for the government to improve. It's not possible for the government to improve, okay, improve scenarios. So there can be this second scenario as well. So whenever the government intervenes and tries to improve the scenario, if it is not improved, then it can also mean that it is not possible in a specific scenario by the government to improve the result. And this is seen in the very standard results of market failure, something that we will study much later in microeconomics. Okay, for example, scenarios like where we have moral hazard, right? In those cases, intervention of government is really not going to improve anything, because when I'm saying that that government is intervening, I'm assuming saliently that the government, that there is this scope of government intervention. So although theoretically government can intervene anywhere in any market process, but it's not the case that always it will result into good things. Okay. But before that, one of the reason that we talk about government, even when we accept the fact that market mechanisms are good, is because even to guarantee market mechanism, institutions must be preserved. Institutions must be preserved. Okay. So, in other words, we can write that uh, for the invisible hand, for the invisible hand to work, for the invisible hand to work, government must enforce rules and maintain institutions. Maintain institutions. Now, this is this argument goes much deeper than we can one can possibly imagine. Okay, for example, in democracy, like us and like most of the countries in this world, in democracy we talk about elected power, right? So one election that is currently running in US, and one other which we have in 2021, for which rallies are going on, and currently in Bihar we have legislative election. So democracy, in democracy, elected power it plays a huge role, right? And democracy is all about elected power. But even in this democratic structure, you will observe that there are unelected powers. Okay. And one of the famous example is RBI. All right. So it's a government body, but it's unelected power. It is selected power. Then comes SEBI. Okay. And then comes our judiciary. So we do not have elected power there. We have selected power. Okay. So these things, all right. So Supreme Court judge, possibly, although I mean he is selected. We do not vote for them. That's not how it works. But in elected structure in parliament, it is done. So why these institutes are there? All right. And why we have a constitution, so to say. This brings us to a very important, to one of the most important term that we have in modern economy, and that is called property right. Okay. So the efficient working of a system in a modern democratic economy, okay, the property right plays a huge role. Property right is a phrase which is more common if we study the capitalistic literature, because in capitalistic structure, property right is one of those key fundamental stones. All right. So without property right, we cannot really guarantee that system will even run efficiently. Okay. So first, let us look at what is property right. The role of property right is far more deeper than we can possibly discuss right now. Okay. So it has a history also, that in England there was a group called physiocrats who first came up with the idea of who first actually explored this idea of property right, taught us the importance of it. Okay. So one of the direct link that we can have is an economy's power, an economy's productive power is related to its resources. Okay. And all the resources that it has, and by resources we not only mean natural resources, we also mean human resources, in the sense of our ability to do our work and our intelligence. Okay. But it started with obviously natural resources. What property right guarantees is that we know who owns some natural or intellectual resource. Why that is important? Because because in that case, if we do not have this, then the idea of exploitation, okay, the idea of exploitation, it really becomes important. Obviously, technically speaking, the property right in most of the cases, not in most of the cases, I mean, technically speaking, the property right of everything that is in the geographical boundary of India, it belongs to the Indian government. But apart from that, when it comes to uh, exploitation, and we are asking this question of who is the responsible person, property right gives us an answer to this, a concrete answer to this, and that is important if we want to save what we have. It is because of the lack of definition of idea of property right that we have environmental degradation. Okay. And obviously one can cite other reasons also, but given the system that we are talking about, property right is one of the primary reason that we have exploitation. And given that the environmental issues are coming up day by day, property right is really important, because one of the primary reason of environmental degradation is the lack of property right. Okay. That we find, without property right we treat it as free, and when we treat it as free, we exploit it. Okay. So what is property right? The ability, so we must start with it is the ability. So it is the ability of an individual to and exercise own and exercise control over scarce resources. Scarce resources. Okay. Okay. So here, so the ability of an individual. Now, this is a very important word. Why it is important? Because generally, property right is a term which is associated with something called an individual, but it's not really the case always. For example, in India, since we have Aboriginal people who are uh, who are living on a forest, okay, living, extracting food and livelihood from a forest or from huge lakes, we do not have individual property right there. So what we have is we term it as commons. Okay. So for example, think of tribals. They are here thousands of years. They are here for more thousands of years more than the years we are here. Okay, so they are much older than us, and they always owned natural resources in a common sense. So their idea of land owning or resource owning is very different from us, and that is true for any tribal, so to say. So the tribals that we talk about, Bengal, for them it is true. For the tribals which are there in Odisha, for them it is true, and for the tribals who were there once in North America, okay, for them also it is true. So how to treat that? When we treat property right in those cases, we provide property rights to groups, all right, and it's common, even as we say, in some cases for lakes also, that we provide property right to an entire group, not an individual, but that group, when we study it in theory, that group, the behavior of this group is treated as individual behavior. So the group decides what is best for the resource. Okay, this is the first point. Second thing, which is very interesting and which connects to environment, is that this word scarce. You see, what is scarce or what is not, we studied that it depends largely on the demand structure, or the not or the structure of desire that we have in the society, right? So earlier, the exploitation of environment occurred in a very large way because we never treated it as a scarce resource. But as time moved on, we realized that we need mangrove if we want to survive cyclones and tornadoes. We realized that much later. Okay, we need mangrove, we need fresh water if we want to eat some, fish or something like that. Okay, so because of that, and even Delhi is realizing in every winter how scarce resource fresh air can be, because it is causing lung disease, and coupled with coronavirus, that is just dangerous. So what is scarce and what is not, that sense itself changes, and we explored that much earlier. So what we are saying, that when I am enlisting some resource as scarce, I assign what, the ownership and the exercise to control. By control, we mean how to use that resource. What will be the optimal use of the resource? That is assigned either to an individual or to a group, which will act as if it's an individual. Okay. All right. Now, obviously, property right is not the only scenario which has the government's role in it. We talked about the undesirability of market outcomes. So that takes us to a word which is called market failure. Market failure. Okay. Now, as we said, that here the role can be either to promote efficiency, or equity. Okay. So we'll take first one example of each. So in case of equity, let's talk about the price of onions. So having 100 rupees or 90 rupees a kilo is not really an equitable price. Right? So government may think to come over and solve the problem using imported onions, or probably rationing it. Okay, so one of the solution that we always observe is rationing. Okay, so for example, in food security bill, when the government is giving people rice at 2 rupees per kilo, the idea is to promote equity, that at least everybody should have rice to eat. Okay, So that is equity. And whenever that equity word comes in mind, we very naturally we understand the role of the government. But it's not the always case that market can promote efficiency. Okay, it's not always the case. So, for example, here by efficiency, when we talk about efficiency, we go to a topic which is called market structure. Okay, and you have this market structure in detail in later in your intermediate micro. So in market structure, let me just enlist at this chance. So we have something called perfect competition, which we treat as the ideal, much like the ideal states that we have in physics, let's say. Perfect competition is an ideal market structure for us. And like any ideal structure, perfect competition is rarely observable, right? That goes for any ideal structure. Okay, so then number two, and from number two, we have market structure, lack of efficiency. So in number two, we have monopoly. So a single farm catering um a whole market. Okay, now it's not the case that in always we have monopoly. Monopoly actually typically having a single farm is rare. So then comes oligopoly. And oligopoly basically means a very small group of farm controlling the price and quantities that are there at equilibrium in a market. Okay, so there is also one which we'll study, which is called monopolistic competition. Although as a market structure, monopolistic competition is very common. One of the example is, as we call it, FMCG, that is fast moving consumer goods. Fast moving consumer goods. So FMCG market is of monopolistic competitive structure. So what are we talking about here? Any kind of packaged food that you can imagine. Okay, so packaged atta, packaged rice, packaged chips, packaged biscuit, milk, anything. Okay, so that the relevant market structure is monopolistic competition. Then if we go to the cosmetics, all of the cosmetics market for cosmetics belongs to monopolistic competition. So you look for soap, shampoo, body wash, creams of different types, okay, makeup things, and anything of that sort. All of them belongs to a market structure called monopolistic competition. Now, monopolistic competition is very common in that sense, but the only problem that we have is the theoretical model is not that, let's just say, consistent. But anyways, we'll study all of that. But here we are interested in the fact that the efficiency that is guaranteed by perfect competition, which is rare to observe, is not observable in these three. And and more often, we actually have one of these three rather than perfect competition itself. So so how do we in reality control that? There is something called an industry concentration index. Okay, so this will appear in in probably masters. You will see this industry concentration index. So here we have an index which tells us how much market share is owned by a company. Okay, because all the large companies, for example Tata or Reliance, they are not really only one company, they are called group of industries. So they have a huge set of companies serving in almost all kinds of market, and that goes for our own ITC as well. So we have something called industry concentration index, which measures how much market control is actually exercised by a company. Then we have in India we have something called CCI. This is called, as I remember it, Competition Commission of India. Okay, so this CCI guarantees that although we have these three market structures, more common are 3 and 4, CCI guarantees the fact that it never get too much away from this perfect competitive world. Okay, so Competition and Commission of India ensures that certain degree of competitiveness always remains there in our economy, so to guarantee some level of efficiency. Okay, so we said that when this is gone, we use a term called market failure. So let us look at the definition of it. So what is a market failure? A situation in which a market left on its own fails to allocate resources efficiently. Okay. So what it tells us is that we are concerned about, if we go by term, we are concerned about this allocation of resources. So it's not that we are only concerned about the production from the resources, but we are also interested in allocation. Okay. Now we have studied several types of scenarios where this efficiency is lost. But if we talk about general reasons of market failure, then there are two which comes in a large way. Okay, so first one is externality. Living in the era of environmental concern, understanding externality is very simple. And to understand externality, we don't have to take huge examples also. Take this city, okay, Kolkata. Think of any barren land, or let's make it more precise. So think of any barren plot. What you will see? You will see garbage, right? So a common behavior is you find barren plot, you find a street where there is no observer. One of the interesting habit that people of the city have is to throw garbage. Right? Why? Why it is done? Okay, it is because it's not owned by anybody. So roads or barren plot not owned by anybody, right? So that means you have a free access to that plot. Okay, and because you have free access, you start exploiting it. Yes, there is a scope that probably in a barren plot you can plant some flower or trees or something like that, but that rarely happens. The opposite happens. That opposite happens each and every day, right? Throwing garbage out of the window, that's a favorite activity of us. Anyway, so that is related, that is externality. Why it is externality? Because you see, you are throwing the garbage of your home, and the pollution that it creates, okay, the leaching of water that it creates, that affects everybody. So that means your own activity is creating nuisance for others. Okay, so that means that when I'm talking about what you get from your activity, okay, what is the result of you throwing the garbage, I cannot talk about only you, I have to talk about the other people who are affected. So that is externality, and when that happens, market fails to guarantee efficient outcome. Okay, so what is the definition here? So externality is, so it is the impact it is the impact of one person's, that's apostrophe S, one person's actions on the well-being of a bystander. So what do you mean by a bystander? Bystander means someone who is not doing anything, just watching. So you are basically ruining that guy's life, right? And one of the, I think currently one of the biggest example of externality is created by when you spit, at some place, because that is the externality which will cause others to fall into the grasp of coronavirus. So that's why spitting everywhere is not a good idea. I mean, spitting everywhere is always a bad idea, but then in our country, it's very hard to make people understand that. Anyways, so externality. And the other thing which relates to this different market structure is market power. Obviously, monopoly has huge market power. With oligopoly, it reduces. With monopolistic competition, it reduces further. And in perfect competition, we start with a setup where farms or consumers, they do not have the market power to influence prices. By saying market power, okay. So by saying market power, we basically are trying to say that market power to influence the market price. Okay, that's what we mean. Now, do not think that when we talk about market power, we only talk about farms. It can be on the consumer side, right? For example, imagine a labor union. So, no, obviously, labor union is not the consumer. Labor union here is the supplier, right? So, imagine labor union, right? So, labor union can have monopoly power, and obviously they control the price, but that's a group of individual, not really a production house in the usual sense, let's say. But then again, think of a monopolist farm which is the only buyer of a resource. Okay, in that case, it can actually control, as a buyer, it can also control the price. So when you talk about market power, generally we refer to farms, but do not think that we talk only about farms. It is observed in some cases, in case of consumers also. Okay, so we have a phrase for that. So just let me mention, for example, we have monopoly when we talk about the market power of a farm, and we have monopsony. Okay, monopsony. So much like we have OLY here, or rather poly here actually. Here the word is poly, so POLY here. Much like that, we have SONY here. So monopoly, monopsony. Similarly, oligopsony. Okay. Okay. So let's look at the idea of market power. So what is the market power? It is the ability. It is the ability of a single economic actor or agent. So of a single economic agent, remember, we are not saying farm, see? So economic agent or a small group. We put that in bracket. So or a small group. Okay. To have a substantial influence, to have a substantial influence on the market price. On the market price. Okay. So that is the idea. Okay. So now we'll move on to how the economy works as a whole. Okay. And in this, we'll discuss three principles, the last three. And these three principles will lead us to the next topic or the next important ideas of economics. Okay. So when we say the economy as a whole, obviously we are talking about certain level of macro ideas, right? Certain level of macro ideas. So we'll explore mostly the first two principles are macro ideas. And as I said that all the macro ideas are related to the polity of that nation. Okay, not politics, polity. Polity of that nation. So even when we discuss the principles, we must always remember that whenever we are talking about the real world scenarios related to these principles, we are also underlying in the background, we are also talking about a certain polity that is which is very important. Okay, so let's look at the first. So this will be our principle 8. It says a country's standard of living a country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. Okay. Now, this is a background requirement, right? Obviously, if you have to have a higher standard of living, you need to produce goods and services. Otherwise, how will you have that? But then I must also say that this word produce, although this is a background word, this is a very important word. Remember also the fact that trade in picture, with trade in picture, it is not necessary at all, and it is the reality. It is not that the countries actually produce what they have to consume. Okay, so there's a huge difference. For example, just to give you an example, in the so-called in the standard English breakfast, many of the foods are imported. Okay, so they are having that goods to food to consume, but they are not really producing it. So why then we are saying this? Because ultimately, as we can understand, that the word is provision, right? Whether we can provide it to our people or not, that's very important. In the other way, in market mechanism, whether the people can achieve it, that is very important. But with trade, that also means that when I'm having something from others with trade-off in picture, we must give them something also. And that leads to this idea of producing goods and services. Okay. So in general, obviously, this becomes a background requirement. All right. So the most important word related to this is called productivity. Is productivity. Okay. So what is productivity? Productivity. It is the quantity of goods and services produced from each unit of inputs employed. Okay. Okay. So the quantities of goods and services produced from each unit of uh, inputs employed, obviously in the production. Okay. So that's how productivity is important, and it is true that in the long run, okay, that is, I mean, obviously, long run has different meaning in different context in this subject, but for us, let's just say long run is something where, in a time length where the country actually become able to exploit its natural resources fully. That said, I mean, we are trying to say that the country can produce what it actually can produce. So in the long run, it is observed that productivity is the important factor. So if you have higher productivity of the human resources that you have, that is higher education, higher physical ability, that is better health, and higher uh, you know uh, high return use of the capital that you have. Okay. In that case, you really uh, have a higher standard of living, or you can achieve a higher standard of living quite easily. Okay. So to that, we'll talk about a result which is observed empirically, and the result is that the growth rate the growth rate of a nation's, so that's with an apostrophe, a nation's productivity, the growth rate of a nation's productivity determines the growth rate of its average income. Determines the growth rate of its average income. Okay. All right. So related to that, obviously we will have a question in mind, then how to measure how much goods and services can actually be produced by an economy. Is there any way to measure that? So to that extent, we have an idea which we will study next, I mean, in later, which is called PPF, which is called production possibility frontier, which gives us the different combinations of outputs that can be produced efficiently by the inputs that a country has. Okay, but okay, so we'll go to that. But now we have principle 9. It says prices rise when prices rise when the government prints too much money. Too much money. And here we, by money, obviously we mean we are talking about printing, so liquid cash. Okay. So this result, it has two very important implications. Number one is, and each of them will take and study in details in macroeconomics. So number one is that money supply has a positive, or let me write like this: money supply has a directly proportional relationship with inflation. Okay. Money supply itself. Now, printing money is not the only way to increase money supply. Printing money, what this principle basically tells us is that prints too much money. So printing money is basically the worst way to control inflation. Okay. So printing money, which is called a policy of signorage. Okay. So this is called a so printing money it means a policy of signorage. I think I am writing the correct signorage. SEIGNIORAGE. I think it is the correct spelling, but just check it once. Signorage. Okay. So obviously it's a bad idea if too much. Now this is a very interesting term. Too much money. Why you are saying too much money? Or what is the not too much? Well, printing money is an activity that the RBI does, obviously with keeping the accountability with the government in a regular fashion. Okay, and there are several reasons of doing that. So one of the contexts that we are in is also demonetization. Okay, so although we called it demonetization, the actual statement or term is called refurbishment of note. Refurbishment of notes. So Manmohan Singh once said that this is what we call it, refurbishment of notes. So what is refurbishment? You see, we didn't, it's not that we never had, it's not that we dissolved the idea of 500 rupees. What we dissolved is the idea of what a 500 rupee note is, right? So when we say old note and new note and demonetization, asking people to dissolve, asking that the 500 notes will not work, That means that these 500 notes as legal tender, the piece of paper that we observed, that is not going to work. That has changed. So we'll learn, understand it better when we discuss money supply in itself, supply of money in a year later. Okay, but for the time being, we must understand that if we print too much, that first of all, that money supply is a very important, controlling money supply is a very important tool. Because of that, we have unelected power like RBI. But this money supply also has a direct consequence to inflation, and that's dangerous. And because of that, although the government has always has, in situation of crisis, the government always has this power of just printing money. There is no problem with that. The government can do that. But that idea as a policy of ignorance, that is this policy of printing money, it's basically dangerous. That's what they're saying. That your easiest avenue has a very dangerous economic consequence. Okay. So coming back to demonetization, so the government decides to print new money which is new, looking different, and for that it started to replace the old notes. Okay, so that is one objective with which government prints money. The other objective is just to simply, the demand for liquid cash, it increases decreases from time to time due to the economic activity. Okay, so for that also the government needs to print money. And just at times what happens is that if the notes they didn't change for a long time, the government just, kind of silently replaces older money from the market and produces new money. Okay, so that occurs. But here we are more interested in the fact that although printing money is an easy policy to take when the government is trying to pay someone or somebody, that is a very dangerous idea. And if we look at famous recessions around the world, okay, then we'll observe the fact that, you know having wrong money supply in many cases has been a major issue. Okay, but just before we end this discussion on principle, we must also say, we must also define what inflation is. Although we'll discuss again different types, discuss on inflation uh, in detail a year later, but just for the time being, we'll define it. So what is inflation? Is it, do not ever write that it is increase in prices or increase in price. Okay. So what is it? It is an overall increase in the level of prices in the economy. Okay. Always remember that writing this line, level of prices, is the most important thing when you talk about inflation. Why? Because if you write only price, that would mean you are talking about the price rise of a single commodity, and that is definitely not inflation. Okay. So now we'll go to the last principle, principle 10. This is one of the central concern of macroeconomics and also one of the most debatable area. So let's look at that. So society faces a short run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Okay. So here, the most important word is short run. But before going into what short run stands for, let us just say that the topics or the economic variables that affects us the most, and variables that plays the most important role if you want to have a political campaign or debate, concerning economic variables, they are inflation and unemployment. Okay, so a famous term, if you look at the Bihar election, is joblessness. So unemployment is a concern, but inflation is also a concern. Now, if I say that there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, what am I saying? I'm saying that if we want to reduce unemployment, I will end up also increasing inflation. Pi is the notation for inflation. Okay. So if I want to reduce unemployment, I will end up increasing inflation. So that means you cannot have a good day, right? Because if you can reduce these two together, then there's nothing to worry. But that doesn't happen really. So first of all, this principle says short run. That begs the question: what happens in the long run, right? And obviously, what do we mean by long run? So before going into all of that, let's just say that the topic under which we are talking is called Phillips curve. Phillips curve, which relates the inflation and unemployment, and Phillips curve is one of the most important most important topic of macro. Again, something that you will learn in the uh, third sem. Yeah. So we'll not really go into that. Okay. But as we saw in Principle 9 that signorage can cause inflation, Principle 10 basically brings us three components together. One is money supply, other is inflation, and last one is unemployment. And if we talk about unemployment, we are also talking about output. So we have a macro concern. Okay. So now we must talk briefly about short run and long run. What is short run? What is long run? Right? Okay. So to do that, first we must talk about what is a business cycle. So what really is a business cycle? Let's look at the definition. So business cycle, so it refers to the fluctuations in the level of economic activities over time such as output, or we must write such as aggregate output, such as aggregate output. Okay. So that means we are talking about a diagram where we have time in the x-axis and y, that is output, in the y-axis. And if we measure the change in aggregate output, that will give rise to a curve something like this. Right? Okay. Is this? So obviously from this point to this point, y did increase, but it didn't increase along this straight line. It fluctuated. And every time it is above this straight line, we call this boom. And every time it is down, we are having a recession. But I mean, the criterias are said in a more different way. So for example, if this is the highest point, okay, and if I divide it like this, then then boom means the increase, okay. This decrease is called downturn. So our economy is currently in this downfall zone. So downturn, and if this is the minimum point, and if I do the same activity, then this is called a recession, okay, and this is called recovery. All right. And y, which I observe along the straight line, okay, it is called a trend value. Obviously, finding trend value is far more difficult than this simple hand waving. But for the timing, to keep things simple, I'm saying, okay, so this is called trend value. All right, trend value. Now, often the y that we observe on this straight line is denoted as y bar, and it is interpreted as potential output. Okay, and the name reveals a lot of things of what we are talking about. So it's called potential output. So what is potential output? Potential output is that output which the economy can have by the exploitation of its resources fully. So it is the, so what is the potential? It is the output level achieved by an economy using its resources. Okay, so I'll just going to remove this diagram, or maybe we can write here. Yeah. Using its resources fully. Okay. So that is what potential output is. Now here in this diagram, what we see is that the economy, at times the economy reaches this potential output, but otherwise it is either above it or below it. Okay. Now, when I am talking about short run and long run, what I'm saying is that once the economy started deviating from the potential output, and then at the point when it again reaches the potential output, the time point between these two potential output levels is called the short run. Okay, so much like the economy going to a boom and then a downturn, this is a short run, and here also it's a short run. So this is what short run basically means. All right, in macroeconomics. So given our principle, then what we are saying is that in the short run, inflation and unemployment are related in a negative way. Okay. Now, as I said, that this basically with principle 9, it connects money supply. Then we must look into the short run implications or rather, we'll write at least short-run effects of monetary injection, which means basically increasing this money supply. So monetary injection. So let's look at them. Number one, increasing money supply stimulates the overall level of spending in the economy, and thus raises economy's aggregate demand. Economy's aggregate demand. Okay. Number two, higher demand may over time, this over time means this means we are talking about long run. Okay. So higher demand may over time cause farms to raise their prices, but in the short run, it leads them means farms, leads them to hire more workers, and produce a larger quantity, produce a okay, let me write like this, produce a higher level of output. Produce a higher level of output. Okay. So basically, you increase money supply, right? And it causes not a price response. And we are saying that a price response can be there over time, but not now, not in the short run. Okay, but it increases the uh, levels of production through employment, obviously. So what does this mean? This means that, and in the third you have, that means hence there is lower unemployment. So coupled with principle 9, we understand what we are talking about, right? So if money supply is increased, we have this risk of, if money supply is increased, we have this risk of having inflation, but also we have lower employment in the short run. So in the short run, and that's important, in the short run, we have a negative relationship between these two, but in the long run, whether it remains or it breaks down is a matter of debate. Okay. So what does the policymaker do? So this is a scenario in which policymakers work, and what do they do? So policymakers exploit this short run trade off policymakers exploit this short run trade off by changing the amount that the government spends comma collect via taxes, comma receives through through printing money. Okay. So this is how we work. Now, obviously, in demonetization, we have seen the opposite situation via demonetization, that restricting the money supply suddenly caused higher employment. So the opposite scenario of this one, I mean, that is just the converse of this one. And although we hope that over time situation will improve, but then the country went into a downturn and thereby a recession, because coronavirus appeared one of a sudden, and it halted basically the economic activity. And it, as later we will learn, that the pandemic's major impact on the economies is not only illness. If we talk about the economic impact, then the most important economic impact is that it halted trade to a huge extent, and that is a problem in the modern world. We will talk about the implication of trade and its different aspects later, but for the time being, this is where we complete the 10 principles of economics.